This would be my first official crisis of my senior project. What topic could I choose that would be long enough to cover the span of 4 months? This project has made me happy and filled me with pride. It has also made me cry, and many times made me doubtful of my linguistic abilities. But despite the many emotional breakdowns and sleepless nights, this project has made me think. It's made me think, what type of world can one create with just a handful of fictional words? Hi, my name is Kaelyn Martin, and my senior project is titled Speak Up, Inventing Languages for New Worlds. In this project, I explore the realm of invented languages and even attempt to create my own. So a lot of you may be wondering, why would someone even go through the trouble of creating their own language when we have a language that works well enough? Well, growing up, I was always fascinated by words. I loved how words sounded once they left my mouth and how they looked on the pages of my favorite books, and how people could use words to create magnificent tales that could take me to faraway places. Pulling inspiration from some of my favorite stories growing up, I apply my love for words to bring you the Kandarian language. The most important thing I have learned while creating this language was this. I could either make this language as complex or as simple as I wanted. I chose the latter. And this is how it works. The words are based off on both the Swedish and Finnish vocabulary. I took this linguistic strategy from Tolkien to create short words that seemed to roll off my tongue. The sounds were created based on the idea of, if I saw the word for the first time, how would I read it? For example,
It's the red button.
oh, I see it, okay. So the word people became reset, and this is the pronunciation for it. I had to go online and look up the phonetic alphabet keyboard and get all those little fancy symbols that aren't found on a traditional keyboard. That was probably the longest process of creating this whole table. And then like mother was more, and like M-O. Morphology is the study of the structure of words and how smaller parts of a word called a morpheme, can change the whole meaning of a word. Here are just a few examples of morphemes that I have created. So, verb tenses. All my verbs ended in A, and then I modified them. It's kind of like going back to Spanish class and how you had conjugation charts, sort of like that. And then adjectives and adverbs, and then you added the NE, so quickly. The word nofa meant quick, and then NE gave it the adverb characteristic. I didn't want to make the sentence structure overly complicated, but I still wanted it to be different. What I ended up with was this: direct object, prepositional phrase, subject, verb, adjective, and/or adverb. Here is an example phrase. Hado til das Abu Kandarian, Salaja en Veranda til Ottawa, Advask Salat Daba, en Ito Loda Heda. And the way I ended up, I never find this, I don't have very good eyes. So the way I ended up having to write this sentence was I had to write it in English first, and then I had to reorder it in my structure of my sentences, and then I use the handy dandy table I had created for all my words. So, go on with that. After I had created everything from words, sounds, and meaning, Dr. Holland suggested that I create a morpheme worksheet, like the one she used in her language studies class. On the left is an example of the pronoun morphemes, and on the right is the sample of what I presented to the class. The students were not only tasked to translate each morpheme, but also figure out the sentence structure. So as you can see, one of the strategies she taught me was you only change one part of the sentence so that they can figure out which is the morpheme. So all these are repeating. So this would be the pronouns in the middle. If you had told me my freshman year that I was going to create a language for my senior project, I would have thought you were crazy. What surprised me the most about this project was how natural it felt to create a language. I didn't find myself struggling to think of sentence structures and morphology. The tools for understanding languages have been a part of me for as long as I can remember. My goal for this project is to show others that you don't have to be a linguistic scholar to create a language. All you need is a basic knowledge of how language works and a bit of creativity. Thank you. Questions?
Do you have any plans or ideas of maybe working this into any sort of creative writing, or you just?
I would love to. I haven't been able to write a lot since I started school because I've just had a lot going on. But I think this would be a perfect way to get back into writing. So.
Did you look at any fiction that does this kind of thing?
Yes.
What did you look at?
I looked at Dothraki, the Game of Thrones, and I looked at some of the Elvish language from Tolkien. I think my thing was that this was the very beginning stages of it, because Tolkien had over 40 years to develop his language, and I had 2 months. So one of the things that I thought was missing, and we talked about this the other day, was I don't have a lot in the way of culture yet because I don't really know who these people are that speak this language. And once I, like Jordan said, develop a story for it, then those words would be created.
That was my question that you addressed. It was like, it'll be easier for you to proceed with this if you know who is speaking this language and
Yeah.
whose mouths these words are coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you have intent, and then you have many objects of address,
Mm-hmm.
and so forth. A book that always interested me that did this, though not in trying to do an entire language, but pieces of vocabulary that would fit
Mhm.
in, was Richard Adams' Watership Downs.
I actually have that book.
That
I
story. He has a vocabulary that envelops the world of these rabbits, and it's an epic story that takes place on a very small scale of a few acres. But it uses a lot of words that we don't know that are part of their culture, but you start to learn them through the
You can also
assimilation.
look at Anthony Burgess' A Cop.
I did.
Yeah,
I've actually read that in high school, and one of the things I discovered, the story itself is really strange. And if you've never read it, I think you should. But I found it quite rewarding to read because it doesn't give you, this means this. It just throws you in, and you learn it as you go. And by the end of the book, you're able to kind of get the jargon and slang of this whole new world.
Kaelyn, one of the challenges that we have with the English language right now is figuring out what kinds of pronouns to use for people who don't self-identify as exclusively masculine or exclusively feminine. And since you have the opportunity to create your own language, I'm wondering if you'd creating any kinds of gender blending options in your pronoun vocabulary?
I've never actually thought about that, but then again, it was me. I haven't thought about much into the culture of, quote unquote, the Kondurian people. So.
In fact, you had the idea that they weren't even humans, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
or like on
They may not
another
even have
planet.
genders. They may have multiple genders for all you know,
But her
right?
initial vocabulary chart was grandfather,
Yeah.
grandmother, son, daughter, so it was very binary
Yeah.
to start
Yeah.
with.
And you said it was based on what, you said Swedish, I think?
Yes.
What was it based on?
Because in one of my sources, they said that Tolkien used shorter words to have it more aesthetically sounding instead of trying to string a huge long word together and having different. Because then once you do that, you lose an audience. And he chose the Swedish and Finnish vocabulary because they had very short vocabulary words. Basically.
So I'm going to tie in with Mel's question. Did you think about gendering? So you've taken Spanish, obviously, you
Yeah.
said that, and Spanish is gendered, right? I'm not wrong there. Haven't taken Spanish.
Yeah.
And so the language itself, is the language itself gendered? Are your nouns gendered? Are your verbs gendered? Or
I didn't think about it that way.
yeah.
I knew I had to distinguish between each, what was a present, past, or
Right. So you
Future.
did time, but not
Mhm.
that. Okay.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
Kim, would you talk a little bit about, I mean, I know you had some other plans, some other ideas that kind of led into this. Would you be comfortable talking at all about your initial sort of goal, your hopes for creating, for something like for people like the writers who came up with Dothraki and
So my initial thought was, I'm going to learn how to create a language, and then I can write a how-to book for other people to create their own language. But as I started going, and as I started developing my language, I couldn't meet the time, and I was kind of, the time was getting away from me, so I ended up having to do a research component instead.
what advice would you give to would-be creators of other languages for fiction, for television or movies? What kind of advice would you give those folks?
From my own experience, and what we've talked about recently, know the culture,
Mm-hmm.
be open-minded, and don't be afraid to try new things.
Any other questions? Thank you, Kaelyn.